Hi everybody, this is a video in relation to Escuela Oficial de Idiomas, the Comprehension de Lectura. Last week we did an exercise about China and the text, and this week is the second task. And I will show you the text. We will analyze the vocabulary, analyze the text, and look at the questions and try to do the correct answers. Okay. So first I will read for pronunciation and I will try to give you some tips and some advice about the correct answer and try to help as much as possible. Okay. So on the left, you can see the exercise, the exam. So it's the B2 and this particular exercise is from Andalusia. And you have the Comprehension de Lectura, the introduction at the beginning. So this exam is very popular in Spain. It's very important for the public service exams, and similar with Cambridge, they're similar style, but they are very good exam in relation to English. So here are the instructions for this section, and you can see 75 minutes. You have two tasks. Okay, tarea in Espanol, in English is task, two tasks, and you can see at the bottom, this is the first task from last week. And you remember in the video from last week, we analyzed the vocabulary, we analyzed the expressions, and we tried to identify the correct answers. Okay, so you can see the bottom, that was last week. So this week, this is the text, this is the article in relation to this week, and it's about Australia. Okay, so first I will read the text and then we can analyze the vocabulary. I recommend that you try to do this exercise yourself first, and after we can look at the vocabulary on the video. But first I recommend definitely that you try to do this exercise yourself. Okay, so we have one paragraph, two paragraph, three. Well, the first one is the example, so we will forget the first one and eliminate the first paragraph. So we have one paragraph, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 paragraphs. Okay, and your job is to select here the correct letter for the appropriate paragraph. Okay, so there's 10 paragraphs, quite different, bastante diferente, and we have, I think, 13, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13 options here for the 10 paragraphs, because this option is selected for the first example. Okay, so that means finally there are 3 extra headings that are not necessary. Okay, so from this list there are 3 options that are not necessary in the answers. Okay, so here's the list, and we have to match the correct letter with the appropriate paragraph at the top. Okay, so let's read the questions first, the options. So A is, I'll just try and zoom in to make it a little bit bigger. A is educational signposting, a little bit difficult vocabulary, signposting. Okay, B is the world, the El Mundo, the world of mate. C is the sporting divide. D is the quality of ingredients. E is the history or culture. F is climate change. G is cheap food. H is the nothingness in between. I is selected already. J is bring your own bottle. K is the weather. L is tipping ambivalence. And M is plug sockets. Okay, with N the distances. So 1 or 2 words, a little bit difficult. And okay, so first let me read the text for you. We go to the top of the text and we just read to practice the pronunciation and also to understand the sentiment and the feeling of the text, because that is very important. It's so important to understand the sense and the feeling of the text first. Okay, so let's go. We start at the top, and I will zoom in also to make it a bit bigger so you can see everything, and I will reduce my camera, my screen. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to open and zoom in a little. So Australia, travel tips. Tip is como consejo. Okay, in this case it's como consejo. I think the other one, propina, in relation to money is a different. So there's 2 meanings in relation to tips. One is consejo, like advice, and the second is in relation to the restaurant or the bar. You give a tip. It's like a little money to donate or to contribute, okay? And here it's like advice or opinion advice for first-time visitors, okay? So this word is together, juntos, first time, it's one adjective, and the visitor is the substantive, okay? So the first heading we have already, the Sydney Harbour recalibration. The Sydney Opera House is the international icon, but it's smaller and more beige than most people expect. The Sydney Harbour Bridge, however, is way more impressive than build. Okay, I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see. Hopefully that's good. Is way more impressive than build. So on balance, the views from Circular Quay, so this pronunciation is difficult, quay, Circular Quay, como clave, the same, the quay, it's the side of the river, are slightly better than expected, but for surprising reasons, okay? So we have the option for this one because it's the example. And let's try the first paragraph, okay? So the classic error first-time visitors make is trying to do Australia in 2 or 3 weeks, forgetting that it's a continent as well as a country. It's far better to pick 2 or 3 areas to tackle well than attempt to tick off the highlights in one visit. Otherwise, most of the visit is spent in transit. So this paragraph, we have a few words that are a little bit tricky in relation to vocabulary. So here you can see my notes, okay? And I want to identify the key vocabulary and to explain the important vocabulary before we try the answers, okay? So the first paragraph, beige is the color, and in Spanish, beige, so we're clear, here's the translation in the box here. Beige in Spanish is maybe similar, let me see. Yeah, okay, very, very similar in Spanish. The pronunciation is maybe different, but here it's beige, and more than is very important for the comparison in English. Okay, so more beige than, that's the connection, more with than. It's possible less than, but in this case, it's more than, comparison, okay? Way more impressive. So normally we say a lot more impressive. It is a lot more impressive, but way more is another possibility to say a lot more. For example, I am way happier in Ireland. I am way happier in Spain. It means I am a lot, mucho mejor, más feliz. So way more, way better. It's another way to say a lot better, a lot more. Okay, so very simple, but very advanced at the same time. Okay, then build. So in the article last week, we saw the movie was build. So here is another example in the second task. To bill, in this case, is like advertised. Okay, so it's way more impressive than advertised because the companies promote and they advertise Australia as impressive, the harbour, but in reality it's much better. It's way more impressive than advertised. So that's a little bit difficult, that word, and maybe important for the answer, like last week, okay? On balance is a good linker, so it's cohesive. These linkers or conjunctions are very important for linking your expressions, for your writing, for your speaking, and it impresses when you use them correctly. Okay, so I recommend and I advise to improve your linkers and really practice and master the connections. Okay, slightly is a little, so slightly happy, slightly tired, slightly hungry. It means a little hungry, a little tired. So here, slightly better than expected, a little better than expected. Very simple word again, but very impressive and very advanced as well. Slightly and way more. Very simple, but very important. Okay. The second paragraph, the connection is make with error. You make a mistake and you make an error. That's the typical combination. And I will put here in my notes so we can see, to make an error and to make a mistake. That's the typical vocabulary that we use with error and mistake. Okay, so very simple, but just important to remember also. So the classic error first-time visitors make is trying to do Australia. So that means travel Australia, complete Australia, visit all of Australia in 2 or 3 weeks, forgetting that it's a continent as well as, so tambien, also as well as, okay, I am tall as well as tired. So 2 adjectives as well as, okay, tambien, also. Comparison. It's far better. So this is another way to say way better. In the first example, we had way better, way more. Here you can say far better, way better. So it's a synonym. In the first example here, it's possible to say far more. And here in the second example, it's also possible to say way better. So they're interchangeable and it's possible to use the two. Better to pick 2 or 3 areas to tackle. So this verb is very important and it means encarar, to face, probably in English to face. Okay, and I'll just put the translation here, to face or to tackle. Really tackle in sports is choque. So choque is the word in relation to sport. It's like a tackle. And it's really the same concept here. If you tackle the exercise, you tackle the subject, it means to really, to trabajar duro, to work very, very hard. But here, it's in relation to the area, okay, to tackle well. And again, here, better is connected than, better than. It's far better to pick 3 or 2 areas than. Attempt is intentar. Okay, so to attempt is intentar, very important. Attempt an exercise, attempt a competition maybe, but intentar in Espanol. To tick off, so this is a phrasal verb. And remember, in English, the phrasal verbs are the verb with the preposition, and it has a second significance normally. Here, it's maybe literal. So the highlights are maybe the resúmenes. That's one possibility, resúmenes, or the best things of the trip. So try to tick off. So tick is the box. With the pen, you tick, okay? And if you have a list of options that you want to do and you tick complete, complete, complete. So that's the significance here. To tick off is like to accomplish. Okay, so basically synonym is to accomplish. And the highlights are the most important things to do on the trip, the most important aspects. Okay, also with hair, in relation to hair, when you dye the hair, in tintar, in English we say to dye your hair. I think in Espanol it's tintar, okay, poner color in your hair, but it's possible to have highlights. For example, todo negro y un poquito amarillo, okay, a little, yeah, they're the highlights. Okay, so there's 2 possibilities for highlights with the same significance, the most brillante partes, okay? So a little bit difficult. Otherwise, again, that's a linker. So the first paragraph we had on balance, like a linker, cohesion, and the second paragraph we have otherwise. And really, I think it means si no. Okay, so the translation here of otherwise, because it's very advanced and very, very good, otherwise here is si no, de otra manera. Okay, so very good, very advanced linker and very fluent. So very important to remember for sure. So there's 2 paragraphs, and just the final preposition here is in relation to in transit. Okay, so I will return to the third paragraph. Number 2, sorry, so this is option number 2. Not only are the gaps between major cities bigger than they are in Europe or the US, there are generally far fewer small towns between them. This delineation between urban and bush is massively to Australia's credit. Once out of the city, it feels like you're in the wild, rather than getting a short blast of green before the next settlement comes along. So this paragraph has maybe 3 or 4 very advanced vocabulary that are probably the key to understanding the paragraph. So I will show you here. So the first sentence is very important, so I'll make it bigger so you can see. And they say not only, so this structure is very good. Here, not only is connected with there are. And normally I might say, not only am I tall, I am also Irish, okay? So not only, but I am. So there's usually 2 words that connect, not only, and then another addition. And in this case, it's just there are. So not only are there gaps, and gap is like a hueco or a space. Okay, let me make that smaller so I can move my picture back up. A gap is key vocabulary. So a gap is a little space. For example, in your teeth, you have a gap in between your teeth, a little space or a little hole. In the mountain, you have a gap. It's like a little space. Okay, So there are gaps between the major cities bigger than they are in Europe. So the preposition for the city, for the continent, for the country is in, okay? There are, generally far fewer. Es como far normalmente es lejos y fewer es como más menos, okay? Pero entonces aquí significado muchísimo menos, okay? So muchísimo menos, far fewer, it's very good vocabulary. A lot fewer, okay? Way fewer. It's very similar to the previous paragraphs. Far fewer. Small towns. The delineation, so just the pronunciation, I think in Espanol the significance is similar, but delineation is a little bit difficult for pronunciation between urban and bush. Okay, this word is the key. So a bush in English is arbusto, como más arbusto que un arbusto. Pero arbusto is a bush in English. In the garden, you have a lot of bushes, all right? But in Australia, the bush represents the wild, the area outside the city. In Australia, you have the city, urban, and outside is the bush. It's the wild area with no inhabitants, okay? So it's a very simple word here, but the significance in the context is related to outside the city, no people, vacío, very empty, okay? The tierra is vacío, empty. Is massively to my credit, to your credit. This structure is very important, very good structure, very advanced. To my credit, to your credit, to his credit, to John's credit. It means he deserves merither, he deserves the credit, she deserves the credit. And here, Australia merither, Australia deserves the credit. It's a very good structure, okay? So one example maybe is to my friend's credit, he prepared my birthday party. Okay, so he deserves the credit for preparing my birthday party, for an example. Okay, the preposition here is out of the city. So you're in the city and then outside the city or out of the city. Fuera, in the bush, okay, in the suburbs. Feels like, that's a typical combination. Sentir como, feels like you're in the wild, salvaje. Okay, wild is the description for a person as well, but I think it's salvaje aquí, puedes ver. Yes, salvaje, so a wild person, but the wild area, the wild land, the wild country, and in this case, in the wild, in the bush. It's a synonym for bush, really, okay? Rather than is very important, okay? So rather than significado en lugar de, rather than en lugar de in español. También en inglés tenemos instead of. So tenemos dos posibilidades, instead of or rather than, okay? And I'll put here in my notes. So rather than chocolate, I want ice cream. Okay, so instead of, and it's the same, instead of, exactly the same. But the rule with rather than, there is a rule, and a rule with instead of, after rather than and after instead of, we have the verb in the gerundio. Okay, so instead of eating, instead of going, instead of walking, rather than eating, rather than going, rather than walking. And here, it's exactly the same, rather than getting in the gerundio. And get is very flexible as well. Get is possible to obtain, get is possible to receive, get is possible to become, como llevar a ser, transformar. And here it's receiving or obtaining. Okay, so receiving. So instead of receiving, instead of recibir in español, instead of receiving, instead of getting. A short blast, pero primero, antes vamos, rather también means bastante. Solo, rather alone. Cuando tienes rather solo, significado bastante in español, como quite in inglés. That's one possibility. The second possibility is rather than, como en lugar de. And the third possibility is I would rather. And that means I would prefer. So there's three possibilities with rather. Rather como bastante, rather than como en lugar de, y I would rather como prefiero. Okay, so here the other example is I would rather, I would prefer. So very important for sure. And in this text, the next word that's very key is a blast. So there's a verb in English to blast, like an explosion. If you have a big blast, it's an explosion. In relation to the music, It's possible to blast the radio, to blast the music. It's like sonar muy con mucho ruido, to blast the music, okay? And here it's possible in relation to the sun in español, como el sol in español, es posible un blast of sun, intense golpea, okay? So a blast of sunshine. And there's one expression also in relation to informal conversation. We say a blast from the past. So if you meet a friend on the street after a long time without seeing that person, it's possible to say, oh, that this is a blast from the past, like an intense impact from your memory from the past. Okay, so that's a famous expression, a blast from the past. That's two expressions for sure in relation to blast. And here you receive or obtain a short, intense impact of green before the next settlement, because in the green in relation to the tree, the bushes, the environment in relation to green. Okay, so you see the beautiful picture, the beautiful country, paisajo, countryside, before the next settlement. Settlement is difficult as well because the verb is to settle, and normally settle is like calm. So for example, the water is very crazy. We need the water or the sea to calm, to settle. If you have the children have an argument, you need to settle the children to calm, okay? And a settlement is in relation to people. When people move, they change location and they move house, and to settle is to stay in the one location. And the substantivo is a settlement, okay? So it's a very important word. Comes along is like to appear. So here is probably a phrasal verb, but to come along means to appear. So for example, you have, it is not frequent, it is not often to have lots of opportunities come along. So to appear, it's not common, it's not frequent to have a lot of opportunities appear or to come along. It's a phrasal verb, the concept of the phrasal verb, okay? So a lot of detail in one paragraph, we have a lot of detail. And number 3, so another common misconception is that because Australia is in the southern hemisphere, the seasons are reversed from the northern hemisphere. That's true in the south of the country, but definitely not in the north. The best time to visit Sydney may be November to April, but visitors don't realise it's the opposite for the Great Barrier Reef and the top end, when that's the monumentally soggy, sweaty wet season. So again, some important vocabulary here for sure. The first point is another normally is singular substantivo. Another misconception. Okay, so misconception is singular, and normally another is singular. Another day, another week, another year, another person, singular. And the opposite is other. Normally we say other people, other days, other weeks, other years, other misconceptions in this case. But because it's another, it's singular. Okay, in is for the hemisphere. So in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere. And south is the substantivo and southern is the adjective. Okay, so here southern is the adjective and the south is the substantive. So let me write. The south is the noun and southern is the adjective. All right, so very interesting. And here it's a suffico, the suffix, southern. It's the same at northern, western, eastern, southern. Okay, so very good vocabulary. And here, again, the preposition is appropriate for the south, in the north, in the south of the country. So just the importance of the preposition. And again, in the north. Maybe, so here we have a modal verb, maybe. It's a possibility. The significance of may is a possibility. And there are 2 other modal verbs with the same significance, could be or might be. So here, it's possible could be or might be. It's exactly the same. And remember, after the modal verb, we have the infinitive. May go, could go, should go. So after the modal, we have the infinitive. And here's another example. Modal plus infinitive, and you eliminate 2 always. Okay, so very important. The next preposition is November to, or April, so very simple. Noviembre a abril, to in relation to the time and the movement. Realize is como darse cuenta, but the visitors don't realize. So it's como darse cuenta, to realize. It's the opposite for the Great Barrier Reef. This vocabulary is very difficult and very important. So soggy is related to wet, mojado. Okay, so wet. So particularly like bread. If you have the bread and the water enters the bread, and then the bread is very soggy, it's exactly that situation. So normally the bread is dry and the bread is hard, como seca y duro. Pero si tienes agua en el pan, el agua transformar en soggy, adjetivo soggy. And that's the perfect example. And here it's related to the environment. It's very soggy. Sweaty. So the verb to sweat is sudar. If you're exercising and you sweat, como sudar. So the verb is to sweat and the adjective is sweaty. Okay, so aquí is sweaty, adjective, and wet season. Season is temporano. Okay, so very interesting vocabulary. Let's look at number 1, just for the answer. So let's look, for example, at number 1, and we can try and identify the answer. So here we have the classic error, and also I will open at the same time the answers. I will try to open at the same time the answers so you can see. So 1 second, and I'll put here the correct, the answer, so we can look at the answers at the same time. So I think it's here. Yeah, EOI B2, and the answers are here. Okay, so perfect. So I'll close this window, and at the same time we can see the answers here, just as a reminder. So the text is very small, so I hope you can see it. So the classic error, here we go, sorry. So the classic error first time visitors make to what is trying to do Australia in 2 or 3 weeks. So you remember this context? So the options we have are education signposting, the world of mate, the sporting divide, the history of culture, the weather, plug sockets, quality of ingredients, nothing in between, the tipping ambivalence, or the distances. Okay, so for me, this paragraph describes the distance between the 2 cities. Okay, because you have to travel in transit. I think that's the key. It's necessary to travel a lot, and for me this is very appropriate for N. So I'm very happy with the answer N, the distances. H is a possibility, but as we continue, I think N is just more appropriate. Okay, good. So let's look at number 2, and here is very, very similar paragraph. You remember, not only the gaps, okay, so the gaps, the delineation, the bush, like the selvaje, the distance, okay, settlement in relation to the different cities and the different location. And for me, it's very appropriate here, the H, the nothingness in between. Porque tienes ciudades, and entre tienes salvaje, es nada, it's nothing in between, and entre. So for me, H is very, very typical. Yes, the word nothing, normalmente nothing is nada, pero aquí es substantivo en inglés, okay? And in español, nothingness, particularmente, es aquí, a little bit difficult vocabulary. Vacío, nada también, inexistencia. Yeah, okay, so it's nothing in between. Yeah, porque tiene ciudad y entre los ciudades es arbusto, nada, okay? So for that reason, I think this paragraph 2 is N. 1 is N and 2 is H. And the number 3, so a misconception is that because Australia is in the seasons, so we're talking about the weather and the climate, temperana are reversed from the northern. Maybe October, visitors realise. So here we're talking about soggy, sweaty, difficult vocabulary, wet season. So it's the tiempo, the weather, okay? And for this reason, I think F has to be the appropriate option for sure, climate change. So in my opinion, not too difficult. If you read and understand quickly and are in control of the text, I think it's quite clear that F, I think, is the best option, because there's no, well, F, sorry, or K, because K is very, very similar to weather. So possibly K or F for sure are the 2 key and obvious options. Okay, climate change or the weather. So for me, probably the weather. We will select the weather at the moment. Okay. The next one, number 4. So we have some difficult vocabulary also. Again, And I'll just reduce it a little bit so you can see. So even the spots that don't have a massive wow factor tend to be pepped up with a blizzard of explanations about what the trees are, how the ecosystem works, and what creatures can be found living there. Australia has a knack for turning moderately pleasant walks, Manly to Wynnum in Brisbane is a classic case in point, into something a little bit more interesting. So for me, this answer was maybe the most difficult, but in relation to vocabulary, spots is very important. So a spot is like a mancha. If you're eating your soup or gazpacho and you spill, you have an accident, you have a spot on your t-shirt, like a mancha, okay? And también, a mancha is a spot or a stain. But particularly here, spot is also a verb to identify. Spot is a verb to identify. If you're looking on the street for your friend, you're looking, and then finally you spot your friend, it's you identify your friend or you find your friend. So to spot is to identify or to encontrar, to find. And también, substantivo, a spot, is como lugar. Okay, so if you have the plan of the map and you look at the map, you're in the city and you see a restaurant. So it's a spot, lugar. Okay, and here it's like lugares, incluso los lugares that don't have a massive wow factor. That's difficult vocabulary. Maybe it's understandable in Spanish. A wow factor tend to be. So tend is from tendencia, and tend to be is to have the tendency. Pepped up, for me, that's very, very strange vocabulary. And I think this article is from Australia. So probably pepped up is more typical in Australia, because in Ireland, in the UK, in America, I have never seen that expression pepped up, never. So it's very, very difficult to understand. But a blizzard is like a tormenta. If you have a blizzard of snow, you have a storm, a blizzard of explanation. So it's a lot, muchísimo, okay, of explanations about what the trees are. So here we have the modal can, its ability, and we have the passivo, because the passivo, we have the auxiliary to be plus the participle of the verb. And here is encontrar, to find, and the participle of find is found. So find, found, tercera columna, okay? And this expression is very native and very comfortable and very good also. To have a knack for, very, very conversational, okay? And to have a knack for something, it's similar to an ability or a talent, or more ability, but it's more instinct, okay? So it's your instinct. If you have a knack for mathematics, you have a talent or an instinct or a skill for mathematics. If you have a knack for predicting the behavior of your friend, you have that instinct or that ability. So it's like instinct or ability. It's very conversational, very fluent, and definitely very advanced. So it's good vocabulary, and valor, it's worth remembering for the future. Okay. And then turning moderately pleasant. So pleasant is like very happy, very comfortable, walks. And here the preposition into is connected with turning. Como transformar, turning into is like transformar. And that's the preposition connected with the verb to turn into. Okay. So for example, Batman or Superman, you have Clark Kent, I think is Superman, the person. He turns into Superman. So it's convert. And here it's exactly the same. Turn into something a little bit more interesting. You need to be clear between the difference between interesting and interested. Very, very important difference. Interesting and interested. So for example, the movie is interesting because it's object and it's fuera, it's away. The movie is interesting, but I am interested in the movie. Tengo interés. I am interested in the movie, but the movie is interesting. Very important area. For example, aburrido, bored and boring. So the television program is very boring. I am bored. Estoy aburrido para ver. Okay, so very, very important. And here, it's just the difference between interested and interesting. So another day, I can prepare a video in relation to those prepositions. So in relation to the answer, even the spots that don't have a massive wow factor tend to be pepped up by a blizzard of explanations about what the trees are, ecosystems, and creatures can be found. Australia has a knack for turning pleasant walks into something a little more interesting. Okay, so educational signposting, sporting divide, bring your own bottle. For me, I think the only possibility is educational signposting. For me, it does not make sense a lot, but I think that's the best option. So signpost is on the road. If you're walking, you have the sign, and it's a signpost. It's like to identify. So it's not really logical in my opinion. And for this reason, I think number 4 was the trickiest for me. Okay, but we can continue to number 5. So number 5 is a new topic, completely new team. There's no connection. Number 4 and number 5, no connection. So it's completely new. So they're not the British ones, as might be expected, as could be expected, or may be expected for historical reasons. So basically, you need to be clear with the difference between history and story. Okay, so history is in school. When you study Spain, you study the history of Spain, como H. Okay, the history of the football team, the history of the club, the history of the country, país. But story is different. So your friend has a story from the weekend. You tell a story to your friend, you tell a story to your family, contar una historia. So in English, the difference between history and story is very important, and I will put it here. So history and story, bastante diferente, okay, quite different. And you need to be clear with the difference for sure. Neither is like tampoco. So neither with tampoco, but the structure after neither is the verb and the subject change position. So this is a little rule and a little difficult. So neither with the verb and then the subject. So neither am I, neither are you, neither are they. So very important structure and difficult to remember, but important to practice. Okay. Australia gets its own. It's like obtain. In this case, get is obtain. Remember, get is possible. Obtain, receive, become, or reach. Alcanzar, llevar a ser. And in this case, I think it's obtain. Australia gets its own, and which are basically the American ones. But drunkenly slouching inwards. So this vocabulary is very difficult. Okay, very, very difficult. The key here is the verb to slouch. And I will put here to slouch. And the context is the sofa. So imagine the adolescent or the teenager on the sofa, and the position of the adolescent is very like almost dormiendo, almost sleeping. So the position of the body is slouching. The opposite is very recto, muy recto, very serious. That's the opposite. And slouching is very lazy, como vago. Okay. Drunkenly. So drunk is borracho. If the person is drunk, they are borracho. Drunken is an adjective, and then drunkenly is the adverb. Cuando tenemos ly, it's adverbial, como mente en español. Entonces, borrachamente, no sé si existe en español, pero drunkenly, slouching inward. So ward, the suffix is usually for direction, forward, backward, sideward, and inwards is this movement, direction in. Outward is the opposite, movement, inward, outward, backward, forward, sideward. Okay, so difficult vocabulary, and maybe this is the secret to the answer. You will use them as you will probably want to charge your mobile phone, and for me, the last sentence is the key. So to charge is cargar, to charge your mobile phone. So what options do we have? And the only option for me is plug sockets, but it's very difficult vocabulary because the plug and the socket. So for the electricity, you have the mobile phone, you have the charger, cargador, and you have the plug. So the plug, the cable, and the phone. So you have the plug, and the socket is enchufe. On the wall, pared, you have the socket, and you put the plug into the socket. So for that reason, the vocabulary is difficult. And for the reason to charge a mobile phone, I think 5 definitely is M. Okay, so a little difficult vocabulary. If you understand the vocabulary, you're very comfortable and everything is good. But if you do not understand the vocabulary, probably it's more difficult, of course. Okay, so that's number 5. Number 6. So Australian food has a long shed. Long is represented here as a long time. So it has for a long time. Shed is very difficult. So shed is a verb. como perder. Okay, so shed is a verb, and it's typical for the animal. The dog is shed the hair. So you have the hair, the pelo, and you shed the hair is you lose the hair. Okay, to shed hair is like to lose hair, exactly the same. And it's possible when you, por ejemplo, hacer un diet or hacer ejercicio, you lose weight, peso. Okay, so it's possible to lose or to shed weight. Okay, so shed is the same basically to lose. And here, shed, and for me, this vocabulary is extremely peculiar. Again, I have never seen this in Ireland, never seen it in the United States, never seen it in the United Kingdom. So for me, this vocabulary is very, very peculiar. And the translation, I don't know if there's a translation. So let's see. No, I don't. Yeah, I think it's probably the second. Heavy literature. Okay, so that's exactly the translation. Literatura pesada. But for me, it's very, very strange and not so common for sure. So it's lost its name, como nombre is más typical. Or maybe tag. It's possible the tag. On the clothes, you have the tag. And that's more typical, in my opinion, the tag. So I will put here. Okay, so it's lost the name. It's lost the name or the tag on the other side. So the preposition here for side is on. Partly is a little. So are you happy? I'm partly happy. Are you tired? Partly tired, a little tired. Due to is the key for me. Due to is very important. So first, adjetivo due is expected. For example, the bus is due in 5 minutes. The bus is expected in 5 minutes. Okay. If the lady is pregnant, the baby is due in January. So the baby is expected in January. Okay. But due to is debido a in Espanol. Debido a or because of. So the party is cancelled due to the virus. The meeting is cancelled due to the traffic. Debido a, very important vocabulary, due to. So this is a little, partly, debido a high quality of ingredients. So again, number 6 is no connection to number 5, completely different. So it's in puzzle, a puzzle. So you have to calculate the context. Your average pub. So pub is the bar, the pub, and average is media. Okay, the average. So 10, 8, 9, 10. The average is 8. Okay, for example, la media. And cafe steak. So steak is the vocabulary for the food. You go to the restaurant and it's the carne, tipo de carne, muy caro, quizás es caro. And the steak in Espanol particularly is bistec filete. Very similar in English. It's possible a fillet, and here it's a filete. So cafe steak. So the context is food. The context is maybe the restaurant, the pub or the restaurant, and the ingredients. So the vocabulary is connected to the restaurant. Will generally be better than the equivalent elsewhere. Is else is like other, and where is location. So other location in the world. Very important word, else. Do you want anything else in the shop? Do you want anything more in the shop? Anything different? Somebody else, somebody different. And here, elsewhere is a different location in the world. Okay? Exceptions is typical with the verb to make. You make an exception. And I think in Spanish that's the same, to make an exception. Okay? So that's the connection, to make an exception. So the answer for number 6, it's probably related to the restaurant. And D, for me, D looks very, very obvious. Very clear and very obvious. The quality of the ingredients in relation to the steak, in relation to the cafe, to the bar. And for me, D is very clear for number 6. Okay? Number 7. So let's look at the vocabulary. And again, so ingredients are only part of the story. So there's a little connection between 6 and 7 with ingredients. They're only part of the story, though, aunque in Espanol. A willingness. This word is very advanced, very important. And normally we say willing like the adjective. So for example, are you willing to go to the shop? Are you willing to meet your friend? Are you willing to talk to your cousin? It's tienes ganas, estás contento. Willing is content. Are you happy? It's como feliz. So willingness is como felicidad, the substantivo. Okay, so a willingness is like a happiness to embrace, to welcome, to embrace, and integrate cuisine. So just the pronunciation, cuisines, from, preposition, around, preposition, the world. So from, around the world. So you embrace them from, they come from, around the world. And here the connection with difference is very typical, make a difference. Okay, nowhere is this more obvious than in the massive plethora, very difficult vocabulary, very advanced. And it means a big collection, a great collection, a big collection of Thai restaurants and take out. So take out is como take away, exactly the same. Take away food, take out restaurant. So it's connected to the restaurant and take away. Okay. Pleasingly affordable. So very important vocabulary and a little difficult and definitely the key to the answer. So afford is the verb in relation to money. So si tienes un sueldo como 500 euro cada semana, puedes afford para comer en el restaurante cada semana. Okay, so you're able to afford. It's related to money. So the adjective is affordable and the negative is unaffordable. So affordable, the adjective is puedes pagar. It's affordable. You can pay for the restaurant or for the item. And pleasing is como feliz, happy, happily affordable. And it's wonderfully rare. So this expression is very difficult, very native, very fluent to pick a dud. So a dud is like a false product. So you buy a product from the shop and the product is broken. It's roto. Okay. So it's a dud. A dud is a product that does not function or does not work. Okay. So to pick a dud is to select a bad product or to select something bad. Very famous expression. So the context is cuisine and affordable and quality of ingredients is very possible. What are the options? Cheap food. Okay, so for me, G is better. Comida barato. Because cheap is barato and food is comida. Very similar to quality of ingredients, but definitely with the context of the paragraph, for example, affordable, cheap food, I think is better. G. Okay. So number 8. Again, not content with getting excited. So in this case, getting is to become, como llevar a ser, convertir. Getting excited, the preposition about, sobre in Espanol. To sports, no one else, so no one more, no other person cares about, cuidar sobre. Again, a completely different context from number 7, no connection. Australia has a strong regional divide over which one is the daddy. And again, sobre, over aquí es sobre también. Okay, normalmente over is aquí, pero en este contexto es sobre. Who is the daddy? And this is very informal vocabulary as well. It's como quién es el mejor, who is the best. The daddy is el rey, the king. Okay, so a little difficult to understand maybe, but probably similar in other languages. So again, this vocabulary is very strange, teensy, and in my opinion, this article is a little bit inappropriate, a little bit difficult for learning English because the vocabulary is very particular from Australia. But on the other hand, no necesitas entender todo. You don't need to understand everything. Tu trabajo es para seleccionar el respuesta correcto. Okay, so your job is to select the correct answer. So teensy is like a little, un poco, un poquito. It's muy informal también, muy típico por amigos in conversation. A teensy bit of a crossover, like a connection, crossover. Okay, duplication. But Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia will generally bombard, como golpear muchísimo, bombard you with unnerving, so como nervioso, pero adjetivo unnerving, poner tu nervioso, un poquito como ponerse, un poco nervioso, unnerving, adjetivo, levels of Aussie rules. Aussie rules es el deporte de Australia, okay? Coverage, cobertura, I think. Queensland and New South Wales, meanwhile, so mientras, normally at the beginning of the sentence, it's mientras while, pero en el medio del frase es meanwhile. So it's el mismo que mientras, while al inicio de frase, y meanwhile en el centro. Okay? And that's the difference. Meanwhile, attempt, intentar, to bore, muy importante, ¿vale? Porque aburrido es boring y el verbo es to bore. Entonces, aburrido es boring, adjetivo, pero en inglés tenemos un verbo to bore. Entonces, por ejemplo, you are boring me, or I am boring you. So it's a verb to bore. Okay, so I write the verb. To bore somebody, verb. And it's possible the expression also to bore somebody to death. It's muy typical, it's muy informal. Okay, and all comers, so todo el mundo, todo el gente que venir, todo el mundo, all comers. Pero es un buen construction aquí, dos palabras juntos, entonces es un palabra. Okay, entonces, relentless. Okay, el verbo is to relent, como parar. El verbo to relent. And relentless es como sin para. Como homeless, sin casa. Jobless, sin trabajo. Relentless, sin relent. So without stopping. Sin parar. Okay, to without the stop. This is also very conversational, this phrase or verb, this expression, very conversational, very informal, but very normal with friends, with family. The verb bang is como golpear, bang, 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 golpear. Bang on is like continue, golpear, continuar, and about is sobre. Pero es in relation to conversation. Si tienes un amigo que hablando sobre el mismo cosa por muchísimo tiempo, muy agresivo, they're banging on about. Un poquito difícil para entender, pero muy típico, muy normal, muy fluente, con amigos, con todo, banging on about, continue to speak, the same context, the same topic. Okay, so for this context, sports, Aussie rules, deporte, rugby, so it's deporte, vocabulary for sports. And here, I think here C, the sporting divide in the city, the separation between ¿Quién es el mejor ciudad por deportes? Es el contexto de este paragraph. Y para mí, sí es el mejor, seguro. Okay? So a little difficult with some vocabulary. And number 9, at the bottom, so we have one or two more. Number 9, Americans in particular struggle to grasp very fluent vocabulary. Struggle is como tener dificultad. So para tener dificultad is to have to struggle, el verbo to struggle, como pelear. To grasp is like entender. So to grasp is like coger, pero más es como entender. To grasp. Puedes grasp inglés, puedes grasp español, puedes entender. Okay, to understand. The absolute impeccable, impeccable Australian system. So grasp the system, to understand the system. Struggle como pelear, to have difficulty to understand the system. So that's the context. Probably completely different from the context of number 8. Basically, you do if you want to, but nobody particularly expects you to or pressures you to. So aquí tenemos el verbo to do, pero hacer que, no sé, hacer que, to do, si quieres, pero hacer to do what? But nobody particularly expects you or pressure. So presión is a substantivo, to pressure, pero también en inglés es el verbo to pressure. Okay, como poner presión. So in English, the verb is to pressure. And aquí es el verbo, you to. Pero pressure, para poner presión, para hacer que, de nuevo. So no preocupes. Don't worry if you don't have any loose change. So this vocabulary is very important as well. Loose is sueldo. Okay, sueldo. So the opposite, apretado. For example, my camisa is very tight, very, very tight. And the opposite is loose. Okay, sueldo. And change is moneda. ¿Tienes change? Do you have money? Moneda. In efectivo. Por ejemplo, if si voy por café, cafeteria, y dar €5, billete €5, el chico o chica darme change. Por ejemplo, €3, porque el café costa €2. ¿Vale? So loose change is in efectivo que no necesitas en particular, ¿ok? So por este contexto, creo que seguro es L, porque el verbo to tip is propinas con dinero in restaurant, in café. The verb in English to tip es como dar dinero por los trabajadores. Okay, so to tip in English is to give money for a service, for a product, to tip. Very important. And in this context, it's absolutely appropriate to tip. Okay, so number 9 for me is L, but the vocabulary is difficult. Tip. Okay, good. Number 10, and this is the last one, and más o menos bastante bien, in my opinion. Not too difficult. I think maybe last week the tarea for China, for the película sobre China, fue un poquito más difícil. Ahora creo que es un poquito más posible, un poquito más fácil para hacer, para mí. Pero es diferente, no lo sé. Ok, vamos. Level es un verbo aquí, entonces, ¿vale? Level an accusation, that's the typical connection. Un poquito avanzado, a little advanced, pero to level an accusation at is very advanced. Es como poner, hacer una acusación, okay? At Australia. So a little difficult vocabulary, but it's the same as to make an accusation. Level an accusation at, okay? It's total nonsense that it has none, pero nada de que, no sé ahora, nada de que, it has none. It's total nonsense, okay? Non sentido. It's just not well known, that well known, pero okay. Go to virtually, like practically, any Australian attraction or site, como lugar, concentrating on, that's the typical preposition, concentrate on mathematics, concentrate on geography, concentrate on the subject, okay? It. Pero ¿cuál es it? No sé. And it would probably be fascinating. También, de nuevo, no sabemos cuál es it ya, okay, or todavía. Remarkable story, so the difference again between history and story. So this is a good example. The story is in general, and here remarkable stories plural. The Y convertir IES, singular Y, plural IES, such as. So normally in examples for English, such as and like, two possibilities. For example, I have a lot of hobbies, I have a lot of pastimes, such as swimming, running, cinema. They're my pastimes, such as, for example. Okay, those. So you need to be clear with the difference between this, that, these, and those. Okay, so demonstratives in English, technical grammatica. This, singular, this, that, singular, fuera, these, plural, and those, plural, fuera. Okay, shipwreck. So the ship is a barco, y wreck is como destruir, arruinar. Okay, pero juntos es un substantivo de shipwreck, como cuando, por ejemplo, el barco inundar, sink, tienes de restos del barco al fondo, the shipwreck. Okay, so por ejemplo, the Batavia shipwreck, the first fleet. A fleet is typical for the aeroplane. You have a collection. Fleet of coches, a fleet of cars, a collection of cars. Okay, worth, valor. Looking up is a phrasal verb como buscar por información, look up information, look up details. And here, as an introduction, that's even before you even, incluso, start on Aboriginals. So aquí el vocabulario es sobre shipwreck, history del país, and Aboriginals. That's the claves. The claves is the vocabulario, okay? So aquí, the vocabulary, history. I think it's the history for the Bargos, the history for the Aboriginals, the culture for the Aboriginal, the culture for the Bargos. For me, it's E, because the most common accusation leveled at Australia is that it has no history or no culture. That when you substitute the answer for the it and the pronouns, it's just not that well known. So the history and the culture is just not buen conocido. Okay, so for me, it's very appropriate E. Okay, so muy bien. Creo que es terminado. Yeah, that's number 10. I think last week was more difficult, but a different structure this week, a different structure today. It's good practice to try this. And in the Cambridge exams, very, very similar. So the structure, the activity is very similar in the Cambridge exam compared to today, Escuela Oficial de Idiomas. So in general, incluso even the IELTS, the exercises are very, very similar. The ability to identify the correct answer and to identify the correct text. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope this is a good video for you. I hope it explains a little, and I will continue with more material for the Escuela Oficial de Idiomas. different parts, the speaking, the listening, the reading, and the same with the Cambridge. I will continue with different parts as well. So everything is free. Thank you very much. I'm happy to teach for free at the moment. If you want to make a contribution or a donation, fantastic. Maybe €1. I will give you the information here. This is for the PayPal, and my account is the email. I think it's solo NVR per poner mi email. No, it's obligatory. It's only an option if you want. But thank you very much. And thank you. So enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you can see more material on my page. And if you have any questions, please give me a question and leave the question on the page at the video. And thank you, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.